Hello everybody and welcome back. My name is Jordan, also known as JMonster, and as you may have guessed from the title of this video, I have something to tell you. This is something that people have asked us to do for a very long time, and the team has sort of been disinclined to actually go through with for various reasons. But we finally actually had, I guess, a stroke of inspiration, you could call it. The lightning has struck, and we decided to actually split the Dwarves. So today we're going to be looking at the Nogrod faction, and they're very, very different from their cousins over in the Kingdom of Beleriand. So two very different factions, just to head things off at the pass a little bit. Yes, they will be available in campaign. Yes, you will be able to play each one of these and do a full campaign with them. They will eventually get some more campaign-based units. At the moment, they do not currently have any, as we are just still testing the faction. We only just put them onto our test build like a couple of weeks ago. So yeah, happy Christmas, I suppose. It's coming a little bit early this year. So you get two dwarven factions, which is really exciting, which I think brings us up to a total of 19 factions in the mod, which is pretty damn cool for multiplayer. Certainly a challenge to make everything work and be interesting and unique and well balanced against one another, but it's a challenge I think that we're certainly up to. In any case, let's take a look at Nogrod here, because they're a little bit different, I think, than the traditional approach to dwarves. So let's take a look at some of their mid-tier units here. I believe they've got, what is it, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, you're going to see a lot of missiles, a lot of more medium infantry. A lot of that medium infantry for Beleriand can actually upgrade, although I don't think that's true for their mid-tier units. But their high-tier units are also medium, and they are able to upgrade as well. They're like the absolute top end of medium. So a little bit less armored overall, but they are very focused on mobility. They've got some missile play, some really good kind of tricks that are all very laser-focused on helping them be an offensive juggernaut. That being said, they do lack a little bit more in numbers, so you can't just... They're not Ulfang, you can't just throw them at the enemy and heedless of the consequences to the lives of your own men. Nogrod's not really able to do that. A little bit more warlike than Beleriand, so I suppose if you want to conceptualize it in terms of like a good explanation would be their warlike nature, that sort of bellicose way that they live their lives, leads to a higher rate of attrition amongst their population. So that's sort of the logic behind it. So you're going to see a lot of smaller units here. Although one unit that certainly does buck that trend is the Beast Hunters of Nogrod. Very much an all-purpose unit. They do have some strong bonuses against cavalry, so you can use them to ward off or screen enemy cavalry units. They do have some pretty decent bonuses against elephants and ents in particular. This is a faction that has a good counter, a very cheap counter to one of Assyrian's best and brightest, that of course being the ents. So the Beast Hunters of Nogrod, anti-mobility. They've also got decent enough damage, but they are fairly low on the defensive end of things, as you can see there with that 7 armor. Pretty easy to shoot them to death and thin out their numbers. Archers are very, very numerous, especially in the new patch with the overhaul. They are also much more lethal against this kind of unit in particular. So they are fairly inexpensive, at least by the standards of Nogrod. Yeah, and they also have some bonuses, as you can see there, in woods or snow. So nice little all-purpose unit. I think you're going to see these units used a lot to kind of make up for the lower numbers of Beleriand. Or not Beleriand. I'm probably going to confuse the name 10 times here, so I apologize in advance. Nogrod, because, they're the only unit that's above 120 men in the entire faction. So yeah, Beast Hunters. There they are. Miners of Nogrod. We've seen them time and time again in dwarven battles. They still are armed with their famous blasting charges. This is very much a supporting unit, but it is fairly cheap, and it can punch well above its weight. Miners hit like absolute trains with that projectile of theirs, and it's also extremely disruptive, which opens up other kinds of avenues of play. After the fact, they're just sort of middling axemen. They can fill in a little bit, but really you're bringing these guys mostly for their blasting charges. Popping on over here, take a look at some of the archers, and you're going to see lots and lots of missile units here in Nogrod. Let's see if I can get a good shot of the unit without that big bush in the way. There you go. They do have, as many of the axe units in this faction do, they do have a minor bonus versus cavalry. So they're not completely helpless, whereas most mid-tier archers generally have a penalty of like -2 against all types of mounts. These guys, again, kind of buck that trend just because there's no traditional spearmen here. Well, I guess there's some pikemen, but it's fairly easy to avoid pikes, and most players do that successfully with their cavalry in like 99% of cases. So pikes are technically good against cav, but it's not really what I would call like an effective traditional counter. In any case, they do have a little bit of a bonus versus cavalry. Pretty decent missile damage, 7. They've got good melee attack, strong charge bonus as well, but it's nowhere near as good as the beast hunters, and they are quite low in number. I think it's something like 20-ish% lower than your average mid-tier archer. So, yeah, it's something to keep in mind. And they also have that 750 gold price tag. Moving on over here, we have the axe throwers. Now this is sort of your second line of defense. They do have a really strong missile attack, as you would expect. A lot less offensive capability and defensive capability in terms of their melee defense than the beast hunters, and a lot less men as well. But they do their job. A nice little second line to throw into things and throw into assaults, especially in sieges. But this is very much, I would say, a field battle kind of faction, although they can do some good supporting in sieges, as I'm sure we'll see. Yeah, and with a total price tag of 745, they're a little bit more expensive than some of the other melee units, but they can be very, very useful. And of course, throwing axes have a multitude of different uses in Silmarillion. They're very good against siege equipment. You can use them to destroy siege weapons, rams, ballistae, catapults, etc., all of that stuff. And they also have high mass, so most units, especially polearms and things like that, will be quite susceptible to that, and it can be very disruptive and overall just extremely useful for the Belegost style of warfare. Moving on over here, we have the Legendary Company, which is the Treacherous Host. They do cause fear. They, unlike every other heavy infantry in the game, these guys can hide in the woods. Well, every other heavy infantry except for Beleriand, who are particularly adept at concealing themselves in woodlands. These guys are actually able to do that as well. Probably, maybe where they get their name, the Treacherous Host. They appear from places that you'd never really expect them to and catch you unawares. They've got 2 Precursor Javelins, which have some morale manipulation components attached to them. You can actually reduce the morale of the targets that they hit, which is really nice. They've got heavy armor, really good defensive skill as they do use swords in close combat, less damage and no less damage, less numbers, and no cavalry bonuses that the beast hunters would have. So very much a niche for the 2 of these guys for sure. Much better shield value, much better armor, things like that does make them extremely resilient to missiles. Most missiles, Beleriand probably could still do pretty good damage to them. But there are some drawbacks, of course, for bringing these guys over the beast hunters, and as it should be. Most of the legendary companies usually fit into some sort of niche where there's like a choice there, a fundamental difference between them and another existing unit that you could bring in their place. So I think that's going to cover their mid-tier units. Let's move on now to some of their fancy high tiers. And we're going to do the Wormslayers of Tahar first. Now, a lot of these models actually come from the Dwarves of the Blue Mountains, which is appropriate because these are actually the Dwarves of the Blue Mountains in the First Age. And Cowrin Koma was the person who made them all, and he was kind enough to let us use them. Some of the other assets you're going to see are from Skyly as well. He's got a lot of stuff that he's done for us in the mod. Most probably notably would be the Hammerers, or the Armorers of the Hammer? Hammer of Wrath? Yeah, the Gondolin unit, the big red angry macemen, and a lot of the other Gondolin units as well, like the House of the Harp. So big thank you to those 2 for letting us use their work. In any case, the Wormslayers of Tahar, these are medium hunter javelins. They've got a nice little bonus against cavalry, as all axe-armed units within this faction do. It's not that big, it's only +2, but it does work. Little combat bonuses there in the snow. Like most of the Nogrod units that are not a skirmisher, these guys actually charge without orders, which can be a little bit... When they have a missile unit, or a missile like this, it can be a little bit counterintuitive. In fact, I think I might have forgot to remove it from these guys. So I don't know if that will make it to release, but most of the infantry, beast hunters and so forth, they actually do charge without orders. But the Wormslayers of Tahar, they're hunter javelins, as I said, and basically they're good against anything that's heavily armored, so good for focusing down elephant units who generally rely quite heavily on their armor to stay alive. Heavy infantry, pole arms, any sort of like compressed, compact formations, these guys can get a lot of value off of really, really quickly, but especially against heavier units who are generally a lot more expensive, and it's therefore easier to make back the money you spend on these guys, which is quite significant. 1230, it's not a small price tag at all. Pardon me. Yeah, 10 shield, 8 defense, they're fairly sturdy from the front. But like most of the heavier, kind of high-tier Nogrod units, they are sitting pretty at that 9 armor, which I believe is the cutoff for dwarves, for dwarven medium infantry. So they're like the absolute top end. Now, you can upgrade them. You can bring them up to 11 armor, which is quite significant. But it will cost you a lot of money. Every time you upgrade one of these units, it is going to cost you 100 gold to do it with their armor. Their attack is a different story. It's a little bit cheaper. But for their armor, it will cost you 100, which almost brings them up to bodyguard costs. So you've probably noticed a little bit through here that Nogrod units are quite expensive. And that is something you definitely need to keep in mind. Now, the Wormslayers, they certainly have their uses. This is one of those units I think that will get brought in a more like niche capacity. Like if you're bringing Wormslayers, it's because you're fighting Nandon Gortheb or Angband or something where you need that extra AP damage. And I think you'll probably see them a lot being used in tandem with the two-handed maces that I'm about to show you. That's worth noting as well. The photo here is actually their armor upgrade. So when you upgrade them, they get slightly bulkier and they get those nice heavy helmets. Moving on over here, we have the Stone Heers of Tahar. This is a two-handed mace unit. It does exactly what you would expect it to do. It's armor-piercing shock infantry. They hit hard. They're relatively quick, as is most of the Nogrod roster. They're deceptively quick for their short legs. But they are also very expensive. So 1160, again, that 9 armor value. If you want to upgrade them, it's going to cost you, 1260, which is bodyguards for a lot of other factions. So yeah, they do exactly what you'd expect a two-handed mace unit to do. A little bit lower on the numbers count, and that lower armor just makes them a really juicy target for hunter javelins. So want to be aware of that. Moving on over here, we have the Warlords of Tahar. This is a bodyguard tier unit. They are relatively small, but they're quite quick. Much quicker. They have a speed that kind of belies the heavily armored nature of the unit, right? So they've got 16 armor, 15 defense skill, which is quite good. It may even go up a little bit, depending on a few things, just so that they're a little bit farther ahead than the mace unit there. But yeah, very, very strong unit. Absolutely brutal. I've seen people mix them in with beast hunters, using the beast hunters to kind of body block and defend them from like cavalry charges or missiles and things like that. And then once they collide with the beast hunters, it's an absolute bloodbath. These guys hit like trains, really strong charge values, and just really nice all-around defense. But it is expensive. You do pay for it at 1200. Moving on over here, I think this is the last of their infantry. No, it's not quite the last of their infantry. Actually, sorry, I missed one. We've got some pikes here. Because what would a dwarven faction be without pikes, right? Yeah, Warlords of Tahar. I think they're the most damaging pike in the game. They are certainly one of the smaller ones. But yeah, they do a lot of damage. They are fairly cheap by Nogrod standards. So I think, based on what I've seen and, based on sort of the theory crafting that I do in my head, I expect this is a unit that you'll see as a backbone of a lot of Nogrod armies. Just something that is sturdy and deadly that the dwarves can fall back on if everything else goes wrong. The pikes can, they give them a sort of a chance to stay in the game if they're like really, really suffering in other areas of the battlefield. That being said, They still suffer from that armor upgrade tax, so if you want to upgrade them, they cost almost 1,000, which makes them probably the more expensive pike in the game, but still one of the cheaper Nogrod units. And you'll probably see 3 of them, I would expect, in a lot of cases. Maybe less in cases where there's a lot of cavalry. I mean, pikes are obviously good against cavalry. But most players are smart enough not to bring their cavalry anywhere near pikes except like at the absolute end of a game when everything else is over and they have no other choice. Absolutely none. So it's not that's more of a screening tool, not really a traditional counter to pikes and monsters. So I think there is still really good room to bring the other 2 units because they are much quicker, much more agile, and able to get on top of those threats. Whereas this is more, you're probably going to want this on your main line. You're going to be using them more for the range on the pikes rather than for the anti-cavalry aspect of them. So yeah, really nice unit. And I think that they're going to be a staple of a lot of Nogrod comps for sure. I'm calling that right now. In any case, moving on now to the Forge Sworn of Tchar. This is their 2 HP bodyguard option, whereas previously the Warlords of Tahar, they're obviously 1 HP. This is the 2 HP heavy support option that the Nogrod has available to it. Probably one of the lower attack values, certainly a little bit higher because of their size and some of the bonuses the Nogrod gets. But unlike the Warlords of Tahar, these guys have 2 HP. And really, really strong armor values and huge, huge shield as well. So obviously much more resistant to a lot of the things that would melt the warlords, such as, say, hunter javelins, for example. But they do, of course, have a price tag commensurate with that staying power. So, yeah, they do a lot. They also frighten enemy, which is what most of these units, I believe, do not do. Yeah, so this one is more of an inspiration. This one can frighten units. They have an inspiration as well. It's +3 in 50 meters, whereas these guys it's much smaller. It's +10 in 25. Yeah. They are pretty much what you'd expect them to be, being more of a tanky kind of turtle unit wrapped in a hard iron shell. And now we get to go and talk about the really cool stuff that's come to this faction. And this is where a lot of the uniqueness, I would think, of Nogrod tends to lie. So they've got 3 different chariots. They all do wildly different things, and they're all weak to different things as well. So the first one we're going to look at, you know what? We're going to start with the light one. We're going to tease you a little bit here. We're going to start with the Forge Fighter of Zirak. They have a flame weapon similar to the Pyre Wolves from Tolan Gaurhoth and the Iron Drinks from Angband. It does body-piercing damage in a line, and it's quite low, so the missile attack there, it's not amazing. That'll get blocked by a lot of shield and a lot of armor values, even from medium infantry. But it's really, really good at harming lighter targets and large crowds of enemy infantry. So they're quite fast, but they have a very, very low range. I think their range is only like 80 or 90. So they got to get right up in your face in order to actually do their damage. And as you can see here, they don't have a ton of hit points, only 6, and their armor is very low as well. So bowmen are actually a pretty strong counter against them. There are some other units that are a little bit more niche, like the Heralds of Manwë, that can cut these guys down pretty quickly. They don't even need to use their special missile. They can just rush them and kill them in close quarters, and they'll do that very, very adroitly. So it's a little bit more of a throwaway unit. It's 750, so it is quite cheap. So if you lose one, it's not really the end of the world. But if you choose your targets well and you just immediately throw them at an enemy, and of course, being technically a light sort of cavalry, they can actually hide, which is something that most Dwarven units can't do. In fact, I believe all of the medium infantry here from the Dwarves of Nogrod are able to hide, which is really, really important. And it does add that sort of extra dimension to the way that these guys can play, especially in a field. Mostly in a field, I would say. So the Forge Fire, they're annoying. You probably won't win games off the back of them, but you will make some really, really efficient trades. So nice little tool that they have here, and they can also be used to support some of these other units, such as the Engineers of Nogrod. Worth noting as well that the there's basically no charge value on the Forge Fire, and they don't have a ton of mass. And they're, I think, basically weak in melee to everything from infantry to cavalry. Whereas, to contrast, the Engineers of Nogrod very much are not that. They've got a little bit better armor, some better defense skill, they've got more HP. They don't have incredible charge values, as that's more the provenance of the third chariot we're going to look at. But they do have strong bonuses versus cavalry. It's something like plus 10. And as well, they are armed with a scorpion on the back of that chariot. Now, it's a little bit different from some of the other scorpions that are available to the Noldor, in that it's lower range, does a little bit less damage, but the mobility, I think, more than makes up for that. Yeah, so it's a bit of a multi-purpose unit. You can use it for some long-range harassment to support the Forge Fire, or potentially even to just give your enemies something else to shoot at while the Forge Fire moves in and tries to reap a grim toll from the enemy ranks. So a little bit multi-purpose here. Sits right in the middle. It can do a couple different things, whereas on the other ends of the spectrum, there's much more specialization. But let's move on now to the Siege Breakers of Tahar. This is a chariot unit that I'm actually really excited about, and I'll tell you why. So the projectile they have is the same projectile as the Miners. It's a blasting charge. And in practice, this means that for a short while at least, they can throw these blasting charges at targets that they would normally be very afraid to charge, such as, say, halberds, and it will disrupt it enough that they, with their high mass, are actually able to make clean charges through there. So walling against this kind of unit isn't necessarily going to keep you safe all the time, which I think is really, really cool, and really shake things up a little bit in terms of practical applications for war chariots and things like that. So that's really cool. They have those blasting charges, and they also hit like an absolute freaking train. Look at that charge bonus and that melee attack. 45 charge when they really get, 45 damage off a charge when they really get going. And a whole bunch of hit points as well. Pretty decent armor. 15 is pretty strong. They are a little bit slower. Of course, the light chariots, the Forge Fire is going to be the fastest. Engineers, second fastest, and these guys are going to be the slowest. But that's just the slowest of the chariots. They are relatively quick for their size and bulk. So yeah, it's a really, really good unit with some really cool practical applications that I'm excited to see what people will make out of it. And this chariot actually, I believe, comes from Skyly. He gave us a brand new chariot to play with. He actually did the Haladin chariot as well. He does some incredible work. And they are, of course, crewed by Karen Coma's crewman there. So yeah, that's pretty cool. That is the Nogrod faction. I'm going to release the video for Belegost next, and then after that, I'm going to have a siege featuring both of these factions on the attack against some really entrenched, very scary elven forces. So that's going to be really cool. Hope you guys stick around for that. In any case, my name is Jordan, also known as JMonster. Hope you guys enjoyed this so far, and I will see you next time.